All right, so let's get right into it. What happens when the White House decides to take on the entire banking industry? Well, you get a fascinating story, and this one is all about credit card interest rates. It kicked off with this really bold, almost unbelievable demand that then, well, it completely changed into something else.
So where did this whole thing start? It all began with what sounds like a pretty simple ultimatum, but trust me, it was incredibly disruptive. And it came straight from President Trump himself.
And boom, there it is. The opening shot is fired right from the White House. The demand was crystal clear, and for the financial world, it was absolutely shocking. Cap all credit card interest rates at 10%. Now, just to give you some perspective here, that is way, way below the national average. I mean, it's a tiny fraction of what a lot of Americans were actually paying. So you got to ask, right? That's the billion-dollar question. It's one thing to say you want something, but could the White House actually make the banks do it? Could they enforce this? And just like that, the stage was set for a massive fight.
Now you can probably guess what happened next. The banking industry wasn't just going to sit back and take this. No way. Their response was, well, it was fast, and it was powerful.
I mean, there wasn't even a discussion. No negotiation, no hesitation. The answer from pretty much everyone in banking, from the top CEOs to the lobbyists, was a single, unified, and very loud no. They basically drew a line in the sand. And look, their reasoning was about more than just profits, or so they said. They argued that a mandatory 10% cap would just break their whole business model. Think about it. Interest rates are basically how banks price risk, right? If you've got a perfect credit score, you're less risky, you get a good rate. If your history is a little shaky, you're riskier, so you get a higher rate. If you cap everybody at 10%, banks suddenly can't price for that risk anymore. Millions of customers would become unprofitable overnight. So what would they do? They said they wouldn't offer these 10% cards at all. Even worse, they'd have to start closing accounts, cutting off credit for the exact people the White House was trying to help. A total backfire. So the White House hits this solid brick wall of opposition. And what happens? Well, their strategy takes a pretty dramatic turn. The whole confrontational vibe, it was about to become more of a conversation. And this slide really shows you that pivot perfectly. It's like the White House went from using a sledgehammer to a surgeon's scalpel. That first idea, the mandatory one-size-fits-all rule, that would have needed a whole act of Congress. They just threw that out, and in its place, they came up with something voluntary, super narrowly focused, and this is the key part, it didn't need any new laws at all.
So who was the person behind this new approach? The architect of this pivot was a guy named Kevin Hassett. He was one of the White House's top economic advisors, and he was basically the one in charge of figuring out a new path forward.
Okay, so what was this new idea? It got a catchy name, they branded it with the president's name, but let's be clear, it was a totally different animal from that first demand. This is the most important part to get. The Trump card wasn't going to be for everybody, not at all. It was basically a proposal, an ask for the banks to voluntarily, there's that word again, create a whole new kind of card. And it was aimed specifically at Americans who were being left out, the ones struggling to get credit in the first place. And when we say specific, we mean really specific. This wasn't for just anyone without a credit card. It was for this group of people who, have a steady income, they're stable, but maybe they have a thin credit file. You know who I'm talking about. Maybe they're young and just starting out, or new to the country, or just never really needed to borrow money before. To the big credit scoring systems, they're basically invisible. So they get locked out, even though they're perfectly responsible with their money.
And I think this quote from Hassett really nails it. He calls it a sort of sweet spot. When he says they don't have financial leverage, he just means they don't already have a bunch of credit cards or big loans. And ironically, that actually makes it harder for banks to figure out if they're a good risk. So the whole idea here was to build a bridge for this very specific, overlooked group of people.
Okay, so we've got this new, softer proposal on the table. But just as it's coming out, the whole story starts to get a little, complicated. You start to wonder, was this a real plan or was it just, a talking point? And this is where it all gets really murky. You have Kevin Hassett from the White House saying, yeah, he's been talking with CEOs of many of the big banks. Sounds good, right? But then reporters at CNBC start making some phone calls. And what do they find? A major card issuer says, nope, haven't had any discussions. A top bank lobbyist says the exact same thing. We're talking two totally contradictory stories here.
I mean, this just highlights the massive confusion. The very companies that would have to actually make and offer this Trump card, the banks, they were apparently completely out of the loop. So you have to ask yourself, how serious could this proposal really have been?
And that brings us right to the big final question. What was this all about? Was the trunk card a genuine, thought-out policy idea to help people get credit? Or was it a really clever political move? A way to back down from a fight they knew they couldn't win while still looking like they were fighting for the little guy? You know, a political masterstroke. Or just an empty promise? In the end, it seems like the answer to that was left up to us.